ComBank Summit, Forward Together 2025, creating a sustainable future.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is the crisis today and what is the way forward and what is our role, because this is a summit that is trying to initiate a dialogue as to how we should go forward and make this planet a sustainable place. So since this session is about biodiversity and ecosystems, I thought I would give you a brief definition of biodiversity that all of us are on the same page, but it simply talks about the diversity that lies within the organisms, between organisms, and the diversity that is created by organisms interacting with their physical world. So you have genetic diversity, that is the diversity that we have within our species, but we share the planet with nearly 13 million other species, and this is the second level of diversity. And we don't live only by ourselves, we interact with other species as well as the physical environment, and this leads to development of what are called ecosystems, and the diversity of different ecosystems is the third level. Even though these are considered separately, they are all intermingled. One change in one level can affect the other levels and so on. But why should we worry about biodiversity and ecosystem? Because we depend on biodiversity because they provide us goods and services which are collectively referred to as ecosystem services. These are further divided into provisioning services, the things that the ecosystems provide us, the food, medicine, timber, clean water, clean air, non-timber forest products, and also bioenergy. Then we have the cultural services, the services that we get from the ecosystem, such as recreation, spiritual renewal, or religious connections we have with ecosystems, like a place like Sri Lanka. And these biodiversity or the ecosystems provide us rich laboratories for us to understand how the system works. And then there are the supporting services. These are the services that are necessary to support life support system on the planet. They're very critical, but we really don't think about these things because these are things, services that the biodiversity provides us silently, such as pollination, recycling, material, nutrients, etc., purifying water, these types of services they provide. And finally, biodiversity is critical for regulating this planetary system, regulating the climate system of the planet, regulating the water cycles, regulating number of things that are cycling in this planet. So this is why biodiversity is very important. And biodiversity or ecosystem services depend on ecosystems to their ability to provide these services, and there is a concept called ecosystem health. Just like us, we talk about our human health, which includes our physical health and the mental health, the physical and the mental well-being. Likewise, ecosystems also have a health concept. Now, when you look at this picture, you can see the hierarchical arrangement starting from atom all the way up to an individual. That is the health that I'm talking about as the human health. If any one of these systems do not work, then it leads to an unhealthy situation. Likewise, if you look at the ecosystems, they are also hierarchical systems. The component that makes ecosystems are species, which forms populations, and then populations come together to form communities, and communities form ecosystems. So just like us, they are made out of different levels of organization. So if a species is lost, then the community will be affected, and therefore the services will be affected. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is, just like our health is important for us to perform as functional organisms, ecosystem health is measured by slightly different types of criteria. One is, of course, the diversity of the ecosystem, because most ecosystems are highly redundant because there are a number of functions, and to carry out each function there are a number of organisms. Therefore, they are able to survive even if you organisms are lost, they are able to deal with it, but they also have limits of resilience. So higher the diversity, higher their ability to withstand any kind of damage that is occurring to the ecosystem. Then the productivity, the amount of energy that an ecosystem can produce, the higher the productivity, higher the resilience, and the ability to withstand external threats. And if you look at tsunami that happened in 2004, both people and ecosystems got affected. We had to go through a huge rebuilding process, but the ecosystems were able to fend themselves or come back on their own, because they're very resilient systems if we maintain their diversity and if we maintain the productivity of a system. Now, the importance of this is that the ecosystem health and human health is quite connected. These are not two separate things. I'm just giving you a very simple example here. You can see a river system. You can see there's a catchment forest which traps water, which allows water to percolate into the ground, and therefore when rain happens, much of the water is retained within the forest and the rest passes down as a river. And as the dry season comes, the retained water will continue to flow, so it keeps the river flowing. But if you remove that forest, what will happen is when the rains come, all the rainwater will come down to the river. Not only that, it will dislodge the soil particles, it will erode the soil, and it will bring a lot of sediments, and the river will also get filled up, and as a consequence, we have floods. So when you have a flood, it affects people. It kills, there can be mortality and also morbidity, because after a flood, there can be all kinds of diseases that can spread, which can affect human health. So this is a very simple example to show you that the catchment forest has, if it is maintained intact, it provides services that we do not feel, but when you take that away, it can come back and affect us. Likewise, there is a strong nexus between food security and biodiversity, because if you look at food production, what we're talking about is mostly we have animal food material, but most of our food comes from plants. So plant growth requires sunlight, because it converts sun's energy into chemical energy. It needs water, and it needs a nutrient-rich soil. And if you look at these three processes, the sun, of course, biodiversity has nothing to do with it, but you saw the water availability is controlled by biodiversity, because most of the water that we use for agriculture are either coming directly as rain, but most of the time what we're using is irrigated water, that is by diverting water from a river. Therefore, the river water depends on the catchment, and therefore agriculture indirectly depends on healthy catchment forests that will ensure that there's a continuous supply of water. And then if you look at the soil, there's so many organisms that are living in the soil, which are called soil biodiversity, which is something that even us scientists have paid very little attention to, because this is very difficult to study. They're microorganisms, but they do play a very, very important role in recycling material, because this world does not have unlimited resources. The life survives by recycling. And if you look at a place like a rainforest, if you go and check the soil, the amount of nutrients are very, very low in a rainforest soil, because they are perfect recycling machines. Everything is recycled, and that's how they maintain such a heavy biomass, by recycling everything. So when it comes to recycling, biodiversity plays a huge role by making nutrients available. And not only that, the productivity depends on pollination, because if there are flowers, they have to be pollinated in order for them to become fruits. So the insects, mammals, birds, large number of species play this role of pollinator, and also the productivity depends on protection from species that take away energy from our crop plants, which we call pests. So pest control, we use a lot of chemicals today, but there are natural predators who control pest populations. So once again, biodiversity is critical for food production on this planet. But unfortunately, what we see is we keep on expanding our agriculture. At the moment, we are using nearly 25% of the planet's surface for agricultural production. And those areas were initially forests, so converted about 25% of the world forest into agriculture land. And that leads to loss of pollinators, loss of these services, and we are now in a very bad cycle of, because since productivity goes down, we keep expanding and we keep making more losses in biodiversity. So we are entangled in a vicious cycle in trying to meet up with the human demands. And at the moment, our planet plays a triple planetary crisis. And this crisis involves the climate crisis, the heavy loss of biodiversity, and land degradation. These are the three things that we try to combat, and you can see biodiversity sits in the center of this whole equation. Loss of biodiversity leads to land degradation, which leads to further loss of biodiversity, and biodiversity is also important for climate management, and loss of biodiversity leads to climate change. So basically what we are having is biodiversity crisis is fueling the other two crises, and we are locked in a very negative feedback, very bad positive feedback loop here, which is going to push things from bad to worse. And at the moment, the amount of species loss indicate that when you look at the history of this planet, there have been periods where a large number of species have disappeared, which are called mass extinctions. And at the moment, the numbers that we see indicate that we are going through the 6th mass extinction this planet has faced with respect to biodiversity. And I say that because the numbers pretty much says that over the last few decades, we have had 680 species being driven into extinction. Up to about 1 million out of the estimated 8 million species are threatened with extinction, and the current extinction rates are about 100 to 1,000 times higher, and the predictions are this will become even higher. So what we are really looking at is a rapid loss of species. Therefore, ecosystem services will be lost, and therefore we will be affected both health-wise and all our other endeavors like food production, climate change. All these things are going to become exacerbated in the future. Now, the world has tried to look at this, and they have come up with various strategies to deal with it. With respect to biodiversity, in 2010, we have come up with IG biodiversity targets, 20 targets that we were trying to achieve over a span of 10 years. Likewise, from 2000 onwards, we had millennium targets. Now, when you look at how well we have fared with respect to IG biodiversity targets, because by 2020 was the deadline for that target. And when you look back and analyze our performance rate, what we see is we have not achieved any of these targets fully, and we have only achieved most of these targets partially. Some targets we have not achieved at all. So this is the scorecard against which we are going into the next decade, which is the post-2020. Now we have Sustainable Development Goals, which we are chasing until 2030, and we have post-2020 biodiversity framework, which has given us more targets and goals to achieve within the next decade. And already we are halfway through the decade. Now we are in 2025, which leaves us 5 more years to achieve all these targets that the world has agreed to achieve in order to make this place a sustainable world. Now, when you look at the post-2020 targets, you can see the current trajectory, the biodiversity is going down, and the expectation is to turn this back by 2020, so we are already in 2025, and by 2030 to reach net zero condition, and by 2050 to recover. This is a very, very ambitious target given our past history of failure in achieving most of the targets we've set for ourselves in the past. But nevertheless, we have no choice. So if we are to achieve this target, conservation alone is not going to be enough. You can see the black line indicates the current trajectory. The orange line indicates if we do effective conservation, we might be able to pull it back, but not to the zero level. If we want to bring it back, we have to have additional things, which is sustainable production and sustainable consumption. And when you look at our population, now what you see on the left is how a normal population behaves. They will slowly grow, go through an exponential stage, and come to a stable condition. But if you look at human population curve, we are still in the exponential growth stage, which means we have not reached the limit, or we have reached the limit and we have overcome because of our intelligence. Now, in the bigger the population, bigger the demands, and our resource utilization patterns are also changing. 10 years ago, on the World Environment Day, the tagline was 7 billion dreams, one planet consumed with care. Let me show you a couple of photographs. This is a family of 13 living in Bhutan. And what you see in front of them is the food that they consume per week. And the cost is about $5. This is a family in Germany, and this is the amount of food they're consuming per week, and the cost is about $500, just 4 people. If you look at these two frames, if I may go back, you can see there's nothing here that are non-degradable. But at the end of 1 week, this consumption pattern will lead to lots of solid waste that they'll have to deal with. Now, I'm not asking you to, the reason why I chose these two, because they represent two ends of the spectrum. This is one end of the spectrum, this is the other end of the spectrum. But given the opportunity, which frame do you want to be in? What are 7 billion people dreaming? You can ask that question from yourself. Are we dreaming to be here or here? And if we are here, we might have enough resources in the planet to make it sustainable, but this is not sustainable at all. But I'm not asking you to give up your way of life, but I'm just asking you to think about our consumption levels and how we can deal with it. Now, the reasons that are driving this biodiversity crisis are changes that are happening in habitats of the species, such as loss of extent, conversion of habitats, converting forest into reservoirs and all other kinds of human uses, loss of quality, degradation of habitats, and breaking up habitats due to linear development. Then there are issues with species, like overexploitation, taking more than what the nature can offer. Alien invasive species, we are introducing lots of species from one country to another, going beyond the barriers of natural dispersal rates. And currently, we are facing another major challenge, which is human-wildlife conflict, where most of the wildlife that are in conflict with us are already globally threatened organisms, and the conflict is going to push them further into extinction. And all these things are going to become even more exacerbated by climate change. So that is the current situation. And the future, what we are trying to do is we are trying to reverse this, and protected areas are going to play a huge role in it. The goal for the next 10 years is to have 30 times 30 that is 30% of the land of a country to be set aside as protected areas by 2030. That is the goal we are chasing. And in Sri Lanka, in fact, we have already achieved that goal. We have 30% under protection. But the question is it enough? Are we only looking at quantity or quality? Because if you analyze our protected area network, there are issues regarding connectivity. Most of the protected areas are degraded. So just having numbers, is it enough, is the question that we have to do. We'll explore it more during the discussion session. So effective management and connecting these protected areas should be the key focus for us in the next 5 or 10 years. And this will require a lot of research. And today, easier because technological innovation can help us to find faster solutions to our problems. We are depending more heavily on satellite-based data, like satellite-based tracking of organisms to understand how they use the land, and satellite images to track what is happening to natural areas. And this generates a lot of data. Now we are using more and more AI to analyze large data sets. And we have camera technology, drones. These things have made it easier for us to study and find answers to address a lot of the issues we are facing. And also there are lots of new financial tools that are becoming available. Like in the morning, I heard people talking about debt for nature swaps. There are things like payment for ecosystem services. If some people are protecting catchment forests, those who are benefiting it can end up paying for them, creating new markets to carry out sustainable practices or sustainable land management. We are also talking about biodiversity credits, trying to provide people some benefits for biodiversity they are conserving, and higher prices for sustainable products. So there are lots of new, very interesting financing possibilities that are emerging, which I think we have to make use of. And finally, what I would like to talk about is, I said we are not achieving our goals and targets at global level. I would like to take a couple of minutes to try to explain to you, as to my opinion, why aren't we achieving this? Because all these global goals and targets, whether we are talking about SDGs or post-2020 biodiversity framework, these are all very good goals and targets. Nobody would contest that these are bad targets. But why aren't we achieving them? I think the first problem I have seen is lack of alignment. If the example I'm taken here is, globally, we have set up a set of goals called Global Biodiversity Framework. And nationally, what we try to do is we see how much can we contribute to this goal, so we come up with our own plan. The instrument we are using is National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan. What you see is the last plan we had. We are now in the process of updating it. So basically what this plan tells us is, how should we align with these global goals and targets? How do we contribute to them as a nation? And below the nation, you have the institutes, public, private, NGOs, CBOs, etc. And at the bottom, you have individuals and communities. So even though goals are set at global level, actions are taken at the ground level. So if there is no alignment, now there is alignment between global and national, but I see in most places there is no alignment at subnational level. If you take corporate plans or if you take institutional plans, in the NBSAP, we have identified these activities have to be done by various institutions. Now, those institutions do not internalize those into their work plans. As a result, there is misalignment. We always do things, and what we do is, at the end of the day, there will be some outcomes. There are two ways to deal with it. One is to do what you do and then try to map your achievements with these global targets. Okay, we have contributed to this target, we have contributed to that target, and that kind of matching can be done. But the better way would be for you to align yourself with those global targets and goals, so what you do effectively contributes to achieving these goals and targets. But I think that is one of the bigger failures we have had. And then the other thing is lack of funds. Because even though we have these plans, there is no funds to implement them. So we have lots of plans which are not implementable. So again, when it comes to that, one thing that we find is that there are multiple plans talking about the same thing. If you take National Adaptation Plan, National Biodiversity Strategic Action Plan, or NDCs, they all talk about the same thing, but they budget it separately. So we over-budget it, and since we don't internalize it, and since we don't have a plan of having a planned, aligned set of activities, we waste a lot of money, limited resources we have to achieve what we really have to achieve. So it's very essential that we align ourselves. We take steps to make sure that what is in the global goals and targets are nationally captured, and then they are aligned into subnational level activities. So their activities will lead to achieving national goals, and national goals will lead to achieving global goals. So that is basically something that we have to do. It's very challenging, but if we don't do it, it's very difficult for us to achieve it. I think in the previous session I attended, some lady said we are talking a lot but not doing much, but this is what we have to do. I mean, we can talk about this as much as we want, but if we really do not actively do these things, it's going to be a tough future for us. So at the beginning of this, in the opening remarks, I heard the person who gave it said, we are not going to find, this summit is not about finding the final solution to our problems, but this is the beginning of a journey where we will start thinking how we can work together, what kind of collaborations we can forge to make our future a better one. And I hope that this will not end here, and that this will continue in the future, and until we can address some of these challenges that we have to address in the future. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.